Hey there, my name is Keely, and you're tuning into my video log. If you are just tuning in for the first time, my channel is called Top Way One with Keely Cheyenne. I am talking about grief. March 13th, 2019, I lost my dad, and grief has been a constant presence in my life for the last year. I think it's interesting to know how big and how tangible something like grief is, and how it comes into everybody's life in one way, shape, or form or another at some point, whether it be through the loss of a loved one through death or the loss of a loved one through a breakup. But that grief is a presence that makes itself known, and it is a measurable entity that we as humans and compassionate, caring creatures that we are forced to learn to live with. My first real taste with grief, it was a smaller scale. It was different. I was 13 years old when in one summer I lost both my great-grandmothers and my family dog. I remember really being thrown by the concept of death. The finality of it all, the reality that I wasn't going to be able to talk to these people anymore, or play with my dog anymore, and trying to wrap my head around the bigger questions, especially at that age in my formative years. I wasn't a girl who was raised in a traditional religious family in any shape or form, so I was constantly reaching out for the answers. My next real bout with grief was when I was 18 years old. I lost one of my best friends to suicide. That's a whole nother grief. It's a knock the wind right out of you experience. And one that I can easily say 14 years later is still ever present. There are so many questions that get left eternally unanswered when you lose somebody you love to suicide. And to attend a funeral like that and take a look around and see how many people were present in their lives, how much family, how many friends, how many people who cared and desperately wanted them to be here. And for any of you that are sitting there on the other side of the screen and saying, I've felt suicidal before, and I promise you I will do an entire video talking about suicide and suicide ideation, but please remember that there are people, whether or not you believe it in this very moment, there are people who will live their entire life missing you if you were gone. I promise you that. Any person watching this, there is people in your life that care that much. So if you are having any feelings or concerns about that, please reach out to the crisis hotlines. I will make sure to post a link below my video for anybody who's feeling triggered while I'm talking about grief. After I'd lost that friend, not long later, I ended up losing another from a car accident. And as I got older, those hits, those blows, that loss kept coming. I was about 20 when I lost my granny, and I was very, very close to her. She was such a present person in my life, but somehow I was able to grasp and process her passing in a way that I understood, because she had been struggling with Alzheimer's for years, and her body was still alive, but her mind seemed to have gone before her. And so when it came time and she had made it to palliative care, and she had quit eating and everything, and we knew we had little time with her left. I was able to be prepared for it. I got to go say goodbye. I got to see her. I knew what was coming. In February of 2019, I got a phone call saying that my grandpa was being moved from his seniors facility into the hospital. And I think at first I didn't want to believe that it was that serious or that I was going to lose him. I went to visit with him and he's laughing and joking with me and really hadn't wrapped his head around the fact that he was strapped into his hospital bed because he had been acting out so much and he wasn't really aware of what was going on around him, and he had been refusing to eat. And I remember running into a friend of mine who I knew from outside the hospital, who happened to be a nurse there, and she came and talked to me and she said, I'm so sorry that your papa's here. And I remember thinking it was silly that she was apologizing to me. Oh, he's just fine. Like, they're just gonna get some food in him. He's gonna be back in his senior's home. Like, he's probably just fine. And then a few days later, my dad let me know that he only had a couple days left. And that was hard. But I knew it was coming and I got to go and say goodbye. A few weeks later, on March 13th, I went for lunch with my boyfriend's mom and his grandma, and the four of us went to the food court to have a meal and to sort of have a belated celebration for her birthday. They casually asked me how I thought my dad was doing, and I said, I think he's doing so much healthier, and they've got all these new options. They don't even need whole lungs, they just need partial contribution, and if they can't find any on the donors panel, like, family members could potentially try to see if they're a match. I had so much hope. An hour later, I was at my voice lesson and I was singing a song and my phone rang. And it was my mom. And she was crying. And she said, Keely, your dad is dead. And I yelled at her. And I told her she was lying. I was angry. I didn't believe her. And I actually went ahead and made her put a paramedic who was beside her on the phone to tell me. I didn't understand. The paramedic told me that when my little brother woke up this morning to try and get breakfast, he tried to wake Dad up and he had fallen asleep at the computer. And he had already passed. The paramedics were on scene shortly thereafter. And they put his time of death 6 to 8 hours prior. I drove out there. And I had to positively ID my father in his own home. And he looked so peaceful. And it killed me. But I was grateful that he looked so peaceful. but nothing in my life could have prepared me for that. I walked into the living room where my little brother was playing video games. The first responders were there and he set up his game for him and had gotten him distracted. And he dropped the controller and he looked at me and he just said, "Son of a bitch." And I said, "Son of a bitch is right, bud." And we just fell apart. Everything started to go faster after that. The thing that people don't prepare you for when it comes to losing someone you're close to and when you're grieving is the world does not stop. It should. It feels like it should, but it doesn't. You don't really get time to feel what you're feeling or to process what you're processing because all of a sudden there are financial things to handle. There's a funeral to plan. There's a eulogy to write, cremation to be arranged, or a casket to be picked. You have to walk amongst people in the grocery store and go through the checkout line, and not one of these people know that 2 days ago your dad died after all the people are gone. After it's time to go back to work a few days later, and you need to smile and greet your customers and present them with options and act like you haven't cried yourself to sleep every night for the last 2 weeks. And it comes and it goes in waves. Sometimes those waves hit harder. They tumble you under the surface and you're thrown through a loop, and sometimes you're ready for them. You let them come over you. You break the surface. This year for me was a year of firsts, and I never knew how hard that year of firsts would be. My little brother's first birthday without dad. First Christmas. Dad's first birthday. My own. I learned a lot this last year about what mattered to me in life and who was worth investing my time into. I rekindled things with friends I had stepped away from. I cut ties with friends who I realized were not necessarily for me. And although I wish them well, I know that I needed to focus on my family, my spouse, and how short our time is here on this planet. Now, if we get lucky, we might have 90 or 100 years. But even in that, it feels like it just isn't enough. This is me and my dad when I was little. And today is my last day of firsts. 1 year. And I miss him and I love him. But I made it through. And for any of you that are out there that are grieving right now, or are still suffering the loss of a loved one, those of you that know how ever-present is and how it doesn't go away, if you're in that very first year of first, just keep moving forward. Remember, you're not alone.